Hello, everyone, and welcome. See if you see me. I can't see myself.
We see you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. The webinar is automatically captioned, so use the CC button in Zoom to get captions. Please use the Q&A for questions that make it much easier for us to keep track of the questions that we answer after our presentation. And of course, we will share the links for this today's free smart guide in the chat of the end of the presentation. Today, we will talk about deliver accessible UX and design to developers. My name is Malin Hammarberg, and I'm a UX designer and accessibility specialist at Funka Foundation. For you guys who haven't heard of Funka Foundation before, it's a not-for-profit organization where we believe in empowering the end user, no matter what abilities they have. I'm a certified professional in web accessibility by IAAP, International Association of Accessibility Professionals. With me today, I have my friend and colleague, Tina Persson, who is a UX designer and accessibility specialist, also at Funka Foundation. She's certified professional in accessibility core competence by IAAP. And today we will talk about the importance of collaboration when we work with design and try to create accessible digital products. We will also talk about, very shortly, accessible design and what that entails. Then we will cover something called annotations. That's a tool we use to communicate the unseen in the design. And we will cover some parts of best practice when it comes to UX handovers. So when we try to build something accessible and digital product accessible, the most important thing we have found is that we need to create a collaboration and a teamwork, not only between us as UX designers and the developers, but also between us and the content creators, and between the content creators and the developers, because accessibility comes when all three of these parts interconnect with each other and work together. And there are so many examples in digital products where we really need to all be on our toes and involved in the task to create, for instance, the input field accessible. And when we achieve this and we have a shared understanding and we talk to each other and we get the feedback, then we get it working. So the best method we noticed is when we do an agile approach. Where you get iterative feedback. You can ask the developers and they can give feedback, and you can go forward, and you are all going to the same direction and the same goal, and everything works better, and you create easily an accessible end product. You can early find the issues that are wrong, and you can and you have a design that's adaptable, and you can fix and make things easy and perfect. But we all know that this isn't the reality. A lot of times we might be in a process where the design is made first, and then we are supposed to ship it to developers in some other countries, or the designer we are only in the beginning of the project, and then we're not allowed in the end. So we need to do the design without really having that teamwork and collaboration together with the developers. And sometimes even we don't get the input from the content creators. So what can we do as designers in these cases? Well, the tips and tricks Tina and I will share today will actually cover both how we can work even if we are in sprint teams, which we think are when we actually succeed, but how we also can make this success available, even if we are in projects where we only are in the beginning of the project. And one part we have seen that we need to work with is the accessible design, is to create an accessible design system. If we have an accessible design system, we have the baseline for accessibility. So we noticed that one thing to actually succeed doing this is to use components and build components. And because it kind of makes us be more consistent, and the design system is more easy to find out if it really works. Also, when we build the components, it's important that we think about how the focus looks and how it looks in different states. The hover design, what is the click area? And if we create that thinking from the atoms to the molecules, to the organism, to templates, to the pages, we actually create a system that works, and that works even if we aren't there, because it's much easier for the developers to see and understand the pattern of the design system if we have that in place. So another thing we can do is add annotation to our design system. And Tine, let's talk about annotations.
Yes, thank you, Malin. For those of you who are not familiar with it, annotations are notes or comments added to designs in Figma to explain their functionality or design further than what's visible in the interface. Annotations are a great way to share your accessibility decisions, both in terms of design and technical requirements. And by providing them, you really help the developers to understand and implement accessibility correctly. And there are several Figma plugins for annotations. You can search for accessibility annotation to find your favorite. But in this example, for most examples in this presentation, we've used the Stark plugin. There is also, of course, various libraries that you can download from the Figma community, or you can simply create your own. The important thing is that you communicate your accessibility decisions that isn't seen. And here we have two ways to use annotations and to hand over information about alt text to developers. So in the top section of the slide, we see an example of alt text being a part of the UX content. We have 4 information boxes here, each containing an icon and a message. One icon is a blue circle with the letter I inside it and the text, "This provides information." Another icon is a green circle with a check mark inside it with the text, "This is a success message." So to assign alt text, we can simply state them next to the element, an icon like this, for example, in our design system. Or, as shown below on the slide, we can embed annotations directly into a design template, for example, by using a plugin like Stark. This makes it easy not only to highlight relevant alt texts, but also to indicate what alt texts that should be editable by content creators, for example, and which elements that should be marked as decorative, something we always should remember also to do. And thank you. When handing over text content, it's important to set heading levels clearly in our style guides and wireframes. And when setting headings, we are not only defining how they should look, right? But from an accessibility perspective, they serve the purpose of defining the hierarchy of the content on the page. This is especially important to users of assistive technology, such as screen readers, who often navigate and scan a page by using the heading structure. And we need to clearly mark up and share our intentions with the developers who will implement the code for our design and structure. In the slide example here, we have used Stark to do so. And remember here that it isn't always obvious what we want. So if we want, for example, an H2 in our article as well as in our footer, we likely don't want them to look the same, and then we need to make that clear. So Malin, take it away.
One thing that I noticed where we kind of miss sometimes our responsibility as UX or designers are when it comes to layout. We usually think a lot and we have a lot thought out that we think how it should work, but we somehow forget to explain that clearly and deliver it in a way so it's also evident for the developers. So for instance, if we are designing an app, a mobile application, we design it in portraits. But there's also a requirement that it should work in landscape, but that design we are very rarely send to the developers. And if we don't do that, it's up to them to try to interpret our design to landscape mode, which isn't always the best. So here we as designers actually need to step up and try to explain what will happen when it turns over to landscape. Another example is when we create responsive web pages, that we make sure that it's evident when the design breaks from being a desktop design to a tablet design and to a mobile device. And also that we show how it looks in the smallest device, a device that's 320 pixels width, with a width of 320 pixels, sorry. Another thing that I like to stress test my design with is to increase the font size. So it's easy to explain to developers what happens when a user has increased font size in the browser. How will the website and app looking? This is also important in apps, of course. And then if we know what landmarks there are on the web page, we can actually help and have that communication together with developers. And I will show an example of this very shortly. So here's an example of our website at Funka Foundation. And when we designed it down to 220 pixels and sent that to the developers. But we also increased the font size 200% in the desktop version and showed what would happen to different content. How would the footer work? What happened when we increased the size? And this helps the developers just understand what they would do when the font size is responsive. So landmarks, it's very codey, but we can do things here because I think parts of it actually belongs to us and to the UX content. So if we mark up headers and what the main content is and the footer, not only is it easier to talk together with the UX, with the developer, it's also easier to make some other parts clearer in the design. And I will talk about them very shortly when we talk about keyboard navigation. And you might want to work out the different navigation sections you have on your website. So you mark them with nav, but every navigation section should also have a name, right? So that it's easy to differentiate for users using screen readers what navigation section we are talking about. So then that's a part of the UX content. And we can give that in an annotation explaining what is the main navigation, what is the sub navigation, what is the breadcrumb navigation, and so on. Another part where we sometimes mis-explaining is how it should be possible to navigate using a keyboard. So we are responsible that it's a logic order and that focus is clearly marked, but also that it has enough contrast, and it's as important as that hover effect has enough contrast, so we don't lose that contrast when a user hover and they can't read the text anymore. And another thing we should always design is skip to content link. So when we use annotations, we can easily mark out in what order the focus should be. And when we do that, it's more logical, it's user-friendly, and it's easy for the developer to see how we think that content should be ordered. This is more important in some cases. We have a lot of content, and in some cases it might be very self-evident, but sometimes this is really important and we do. And designing that skip to content link It's very important for some users to easily skip to the main content. And when we work with designers that are far away and then don't understand how this is done, then we can easily explain it together with those landmarks where we have explained what the main content is. So this is something that increases the usability and something I think we really should take the ownership of. Another part that we see, one of those pitfalls, is that it's sometimes hard when we work far away from the developers, what is a clickable area. So here's an example of a card design. We usually make the card design and most of us set how the focus looks and how the hover looks, but we might oversee how the click area is. And we all have been there, right? Where we send the card design and when it comes out and we see the web page, only the header in the card was clickable. Or maybe if we have one of those links in the bottom, one of those call to action buttons or links, only that was clickable. And that wasn't our intention. We wanted the entire card clickable. So when we do this, and also it's important with links and other stuff, so the click area isn't too small. This is in our courtyard and something we need to own. So it's important that we also in our design system explain how large the click area is and what the click area is. Tina.
Yes. When it comes to contrast and color, we must test it repeatedly to ensure that it meets accessibility standards. And beyond making sure that our components and text have sufficient contrast against various backgrounds, we should also consider the different states of a component. I think that you mentioned it, Malin. We need to look at hover, active and disabled states. And one important aspect that can be easily overlooked is whether the focus indicator is visible at all times on our pages. It's super important to ensure that keyboard navigation remains accessible. And we need to verify if our design works on various types of images as well, of course, and in different scenarios, light, dark, colorful, etc. And it's important to test in grayscale to ensure accessibility for users with visual impairments. And we should also think about document and instruct our team members, as we've been talking about before, editors, for example, on how to handle different backgrounds or images and how to use color of text. So here we have an example of text on an image. On the left side, the dark background with the light logotype, text and image, it works great. But when we then use the lighter image, it completely fails to meet the contrast requirements and our design breaks down. We must collaborate to first get a clear understanding of how we are using our content and then provide clear guidelines to editors on how to work with and apply our design. If we have images like these ones, in this case, we either need to come up with a better workable solution for both scenarios, or we need to create two different designs that works for both light and dark backgrounds. And here we have color contrast analyzers that we easily can use to measure the contrast value between foreground and background and see how they meet various contrast requirements. Here we have Color Contrast Analyzer, a standalone program for Mac and Windows, and the contrast view in the Figma plugin Stark that we mentioned before. And if you haven't already, make it a habit to download, not to download them maybe, but download the tools and make it a habit to check all of your designs. And don't forget your new colors. When you introduce a color and before you fall in love with it, like check if it works with the rest of your content. Yes, and I think that's it for today. To summarize our little webinar, we all need to collaborate throughout the content creation process to ensure the accessibility and that it works for the end user. And we need to establish a foundation for accessibility by having an accessible design system. This makes it so much easier for us to use and develop our content in the long run. And we need to communicate our intentions clearly. What isn't visible might as well not exist. And we should test our design with users as much as we can and stress test our design with relevant roles in worst case scenarios early and often. And with that said, I'd like to say thank you, and we open the floor for questions.
Questions. Let's see. Okay. I saw questions. I just need to find my way back to the Q&A. Oh,
yes. We have a question here. Does the screen size 320 pixels need to support 200% large text?
no, it's thank you. Good questions. No, it's different techniques to kind of achieve the same thing. So some users tend to want to increase the font size in the browser. And when they increase the font size, that's the only thing that's increased. So the design need to work when we have that dynamic font. And what we usually see when it doesn't work is when we made something absolute, like we made a card that can't be bigger. So when the font size is increased by the user, the text kind of parts of the text are hidden. So that's why we need to just make sure that when fonts are increased, what happens to the text. So it's easy for the developer to develop this. It's often enough that you show it in like 1 or 2 of the pages you have done. When it comes to the 320 pixels wide design, it's another technique that users that need to increase the font or increase the size of the screen uses. And that's when we zoom the entire screen. And then usually today responsiveness kicks in. So that's when if you have a 1280 wide screen, you should be able to zoom 400%. So that's why we say, and then it becomes a 320 pixel wide screen. So that's why we said design down to 320 pixel wide screens, because then we fulfill this requirement. So it's 2 different. I hope that was clear enough.
Thank you, Malin. We have a few more questions here. How should functions used in a map be made accessible? How should we think here?
Maps aren't, it kind of depends, because there are lots of different elements in a map, right? So one thing, it should be accessible when using another input device than a mouse or a finger. So it's accessible with the keyboard. So we need to make sure that it's possible to navigate around you in the map using keyboards. So then we, as a designer, must think about what is the logical focus order here? How can I make sure that it's possible to navigate around in the map in a logical way? And the other thing is when we have a map, we must also think about an alternative if it's not possible to navigate in the map, because some users have a hard time understanding maps, but also because if you can't see the map, you should also be able to navigate those places. So then we need to figure out an alternative. Both are achievable, I would say, but there is a lot of things to think about in a map. So if you want some specific advice there, I probably need a more specific question. I'm sorry.
Okay, we have a few minutes to go. Thanks for the session. Could you elaborate on how to work with annotations for different navs?
Okay, so we usually have different navigation elements. Screen reader user, one technique that you can choose when you use the screen reader is to navigate using landmarks. So then all the landmarks are listed in a long list. So you get the header and you get the navigations and you get the footer, which is called content information. You can see the search as well. So you can easily navigate between those landmarks on the web page. But if, for instance, we have several navigation elements, which we can have because we can have the little function menu at the top and then the main menu, and we can have maybe a sub menu or a side menu. Sometimes maybe we have some menu alternative in the footer or further down on the page. And if they don't have a name, all will be called navigation, but really hard to tell them apart. We can also have more than one search, maybe have a search on the website, and then we have a search between just articles or something. And then we also have two search function, but if both are named search, it's hard to tell them apart. So then they need a kind of name that apparent to the end user. And I think that name is part of the UX content. So that's up to us to give a good name for those different navigation areas and those different search functions. How the developer does it, it's not up to us to decide because they're different techniques, but the name of them is something we can do and something that can increase the usability.
Thank you, Malin. We have 3 minutes to go, and one question here. Do you think we can make it?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you have any tips for when designing a table component?
Yeah. It's important that we mark up with annotation what's the head row is, that we make sure that the tables aren't too complex. If we create too complex tables, we need to figure out if we can separate them into two, because tables can be really hard for some users to understand. Also, if we something that can help is that we can get the summarized text about the table, and that we can set table captions. And all those aren't visible usually in the design, but they need to be added then in the annotations. So it's obvious for the developer what we are thinking about, how we can make the table more easy to understand, even if you don't understand tables or if you use a screen reader. I think that's about what we had managed today. Thank you so much for all the great questions. And it was fun being here today. We can talk about this for a very long time, but in 20 minutes, we just kind of can scrape the surface. I hope it helped some for you guys. And I want to talk very shortly about next webinar we have. It's talented Sarah Källström, our research strategist here at Funka Foundation. And she will talk about something really exciting, something that's coming in the new European Accessibility Act. And it's the non-digital information parts where packages and things should be accessible. So if you're interested in that, I think you should join on December 6th at 13:30. I think it will be very interesting.
And I think Stefan has posted a link in the chat also for you guys to sign up. Thank you very much, everyone, for today, and have
Thank you. Have a wonderful Friday.